We do have two super duper awesome guest speakers with us here today. It is my pleasure to introduce Mark Sheave and Novinka Matnik. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly.
Close enough.
Right, I know, I have one of those names as well where I'm like, it's okay, you tried. So Mark is VP of Sales for Small to Medium Enterprise IoT Solutions at Hartford Steam Boiler. That's HSB, if you've seen that acronym before. Mark has 22 years of experience in the P&C industry. Prior to HSB, he served in a variety of underwriting and business development leadership roles at Nationwide Insurance and Continental Western Group, a Berkeley company. Novinka is Vice President of Applied Technology Solutions at HSB, a Munich Re company. She holds an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University and bachelor's degrees in International Relations and East Asian Studies from Stanford University. That's awesome. She started her professional career in the nonprofit sector and spent more than 10 years in consulting. She spent a significant portion of her career helping companies enhance their technology, product development, and innovation practices. She also strongly believes that the world and businesses are at a critical juncture and need to adopt green technologies and solutions to enable better outcomes. So with that, Novinka, Mark, we will hand it over to you. If you'd like to share your screen, we'll get the presentation started.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go ahead and share my screen here to get us going. Make sure.
All right. So, yep, it is loading.
Yeah.
Great.
We see it.
Well, it's really nice to meet all of you. I cannot stress enough how casual this really is. So please jump in with questions. This is a very safe space where you can ask any questions you may have. We will also have questions for you, so we are hoping that you will be engaged. From an introduction perspective, I think we're good to go. The one thing that I do like to say in these sessions is that I come from a very non-traditional background, having majored in international relations and East Asian study and somehow finding my way into technology and insurance. The reason why I like to share that is that you are all at a fantastic point in your lives where the world truly is your oyster. So no matter what you've chosen to study, you can do anything in the future. So just know that, and I always like to make sure that young people are aware of that, because, sometimes I feel like they think that you're boxed into something and that's not the case at all. So all the skills that you're learning right now, they can be put into a number of different careers. Mark, is there anything else that you want to add to your background, your bio?
No, that's really well said. I mean, one of my favorite colleagues that I've worked with in the insurance business for several years was a music major as an undergrad. So you really can come from a wide range of backgrounds. In fact, I think it's probably better if you do. I think it just shows more well-roundedness and adaptability to what is going on in an industry that is really dynamic. It may not have that reputation, but it truly is. Things are changing all the time. And as much as it is driven by technology, data, math and numbers and all of those things and legal language, it's still a people business. And so being able to engage and interact effectively with people from a wide range of backgrounds and perspectives is so critical. So couldn't agree with you more.
All right, so we can move on to the next slide. We just want to make sure that we're all in alignment in terms of what we're hoping to accomplish today. Our critical objective in the next 45 minutes is to really help you understand how the Internet of Things is disrupting the insurance industry, and it's just really very rapidly forcing us to think about risk and risk management differently. Generally, when we talk about IoT, people think about just cell phones or, computed devices, but everything that we do today is somehow related to a computing device. So the implications expand technology. They really do expand everything that we do in life. So it is very, very important. So for us to meet that main objective, there are 3 topics that we want to cover. The first of all, we want to do a quick intro on IoT, level set on what IoT is and some of the key trends that are driving IoT growth. The second thing is we want to level set on what the insurance industry is, which I know based on your background, a lot of you probably know, but we want to level set on that so that we can start to see what the impact on IoT is on insurance. And last, we want to give you all some real life examples of how it is that we at HSB are actually leveraging the power of IoT to provide innovative solutions in the market that we think are move in line with where society and the world is going. So in today's world, one may say that in the insurance industry, IoT is like a nice to have, but very quickly it's moving to essential. Insurance providers, players in the market, if they don't adopt IoT effectively, they're not going to survive. IoT and the Internet of Things is seen as the 4th industrial revolution. So you got to get on the ship or jump off before it burns. All right, let's go on to the next slide. And we're going to start with a question. We want to start the engagement right off the bat. So here's a question for all of you. What does IoT mean to you? And what are some of the IoT-enabled devices that you have at home, on your person, at school, at work? And again, feel free to unmute yourselves and just blurt it out. Or if you're not comfortable with that, you can write down your answers in the chat and we'll bring them up. I will break the ice. Here is my IoT enabled device. So I took the easy
I have
one.
one of those as well. Yes.
Anyone else?
I always tell people in the bank I'm comfortable with awkward silence, so I can wait.
You can wait 45 minutes.
Yeah, I actually did, but I did just get a text a bit ago before the meeting from my daughter. So I'm going to be smoking some ribs later today, and actually my pellet grill is an IoT enabled device because you can run it over the phone. It sends all kinds of diagnostics. I can tell it what to do and even manage it from across the country. So
that sounds so futuristic. I didn't even know that we were there, in 2022 that you have these, IoT enabled grills. I had no idea.
What else? Other ideas out there?
Go for it, Megan.
I know. I was like, I want to hear from the students, but one of my favorite IoT devices as a mom is my internet-enabled white noise machine that's in the baby's room. So I can turn it up or down. Like if the other kids start screaming, I can turn it up a little. I can turn it down at night when everybody's in bed. So that's super cool to log in. And then the other thing we have is all of our cameras. So we have cameras in the house. We have cameras outside the house. So we can kind of check in wherever we are and see what's going on.
It's a good one.
Great examples.
Cameron,
what else do we
have an example? I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, I could just go with my mom got this new stove, so you can kind of preheat it if you're not home based on your phone. So I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I need one of those. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? If not, we'll keep going. I mean, these are all fantastic examples.
Yeah, and there was examples on the slide too with the iPad and the drone and the smartwatch.
Little hints.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we don't boil the ocean. We don't want to boil the ocean on this because I think you guys were raised in the IoT world, whereas Mark and I grew into it because we grew with the IoT world. We had to get accustomed to it. When I was younger, my world was analog. A phone was something that I used for the purpose of talking to someone, and that was about it. A watch was something that I used for the purpose of telling what time it was, and that was about it. And when I wanted to change the temperature at home, I actually had to go to the wall and move the thermostat, which by the way wasn't digital. It was these numbers with this arrow. It's like the kinds of things that you guys go to the store and buy because you think they look cool now. That's the way that they look. Not that long ago, actually. But the world has changed, you know, and IoT, the most basic definition, you can see it on the slide in front of you. It is really the interconnection of all of the computing device in what we call everyday objects. So what I was just telling you, phones, watches, thermostats, you guys brought it up, stoves, camera, all of this. And what this interconnection does, it enables all these different devices that before were just operating on their own to talk to each other and to essentially enable actions. So again, IoT today is literally everywhere. It's in your home, in your place of work, in your schools, in cars, in infrastructure. There are billions and billions of devices that are connected, and we'll talk about trends in a minute. They produce a lot of data that it's used for the purpose of doing an activity or getting a task done, like lowering the heat or increasing it, but also all that data that is produced and saved can be used for other purposes, such as trends and understanding, you know, energy consumption, or, you know, a lot of different things that make it very, very powerful. So we can move on to the next slide. You know, and it is everywhere. And I hope that maybe some of you have already seen this trend, but the number of devices that are networked or are connected, so to speak, is much higher than the number of people in the world. And the number of devices actually surpassed the number of people back in 2008. And not that long before 2008, that was just inconceivable. You know, it was just inconceivable that the number of these networked things would be more than people. And if you look at the trends, while the world population is expected to grow, the number of actual connected devices is supposed to just grow exponentially. I have a really hard time in my mind trying to visualize what that means, but it's essentially for each one of us in the planet, there are going to be like 100 connected devices. What is it? You know, we'll see. But there are really three critical things that are accelerating the adoption of IoT in everything that we do today. There's what I would call data and devices. There is computing power itself that's qualified as Moore's law, and there's the connectedness of those devices that is increasing, that's even driving that adoption of IoT or that need to use IoT more and more. So let's unpack each one of these a little bit from a data and devices perspective. Just to give you an example, the number of sensors that have been sold and shipped in the market, made in the market, increased from 4 billion in 2012 to 30 billion in 2016. That's an exponential increase. That's a very large increase of any kind of sensor that has been made. And sensors, you know, sensors can be for sensing water leakages, for sensing temperatures. It's a very broad description. From a Moore's law perspective, are you guys familiar with Moore's law? Just okay. I'm going to assume not 100%. So let's talk about Moore's law. Is essentially, it's not an actual law. It is an observation, and it's essentially saying that the computing power of devices, the number of transistors that are in the integrated circuits that make computing devices, doubles every 2 years or so. So the computing power, the computing capacity of any object like a phone, a computer that uses these circuits, it's getting faster and faster and faster and stronger and stronger and stronger. If we were to multiply it in the last 10 years, it's increased by 1,000-fold. So the more computing power that's out there, the more options for embedding IoT, the better IoT gets, the more it's used, because it's simplifying our lives a lot more. I'll give you an example. Back when I was younger and the internet started becoming a thing, you had to use dial-up. And you either connected to a phone or you got a CD-ROM from a company called AOL. I don't even know if you guys know what the company is, but essentially it made like noises that were really, really funny, but it took forever to connect to the internet. Now, if it takes longer than a nanosecond, we all get really frustrated. Computing power. And the last thing is connectedness. We're more connected, you know, the amount that we share via our mobile devices, it's increasing very rapidly, and it's only, you know, getting faster and faster and faster. We're getting more connected as the world. So again, data and devices, computing power, and connectedness are all things that are driving accelerated adoption of IoT. So we can go on to the next slide. Now that we talked a little bit about IoT and we talked a little bit about some of the trends, we're ready for another question for you all, which I think it's going to be pretty easy. But in your opinion, what industries do you think are doing the most with IoT? And related to that, what are some of the things that you see them doing? And you can use the pictures as hints.
Obviously, I would say the biggest industry with IoT would be technology, but I think a different one I would be thinking of is the healthcare industry. Data is becoming a huge thing that you can track now. So the fact that you can transfer data between multiple hospitals, doesn't really matter where you are now, you can have all your visits tracked. I think that's becoming super important.
Good example.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking the security departments or something like that. They just used to like track people, and then like some face recognition or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah,
Good.
how many ads do we all see, right, online of, you know, different security organizations, whether it's for your home, for your business, and you think of all the sensor integrations that go into that in order to make that work and be effective. It's monumental.
Yeah.
I would say efficiency. A lot of the time it's trying to make things a lot quicker for us so that we don't have to spend a lot of time you know, wasting it doing when a computer can do things for you.
Absolutely. Any specific examples that you're thinking of that are maybe most relevant to you or that you've seen recently?
Maybe like the stoplights at traffic, or yeah, I'll go with that.
For detecting traffic and then adjusting so cars aren't just sitting there, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and like mapping routes and stuff like that.
For sure.
Yeah, it's a good example. Lots of good examples.
And I have one more, that retail stores for the sales checkout. That's right now you can see everywhere. I think they also use that a lot.
Yeah, and are you thinking even of like the self-checkout situations? Well, even to where you can just grab an item and go, right? And the sensors know. And if you're already linked up with that store, like with some of the Amazon stores specifically, where they know who you are when you walk in, they know what you took off the shelf, and they know when you walk out that you now bought that, and the charge already goes through. So excellent.
Excellent, really good examples. Anything else? Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay. So we set the stage a little bit with IoT, and now we want to set the stage somewhat from an insurance perspective. And like Nevenka said, this might be really basic, but it kind of helps us all get on to a common kind of mindset, I guess, as we're having this discussion. And, you know, so linking IoT and insurance is what this presentation is all about. And insurance, as everybody knows, is all about managing risk. And whether we want it to be this way or not, we all face risk every day in our lives, individually as persons, in our families, if we own businesses. There is all kinds of risk out there every day. And, you know, just a few easy examples to throw out there: health, like Cameron mentioned, you know, earlier, with how we're seeing sensor technology in that space. We all face risks related to our health. We face risks related to a fire. We all live somewhere, and that physical space has the possibility of catching on fire. It could be a residence, it could be an apartment, it could be a dorm, or maybe you have a place of business that could catch on fire. Fire is a risk that exists whether we want it to or not. And another one would be just the risk of facing a liability situation where we cause something to happen, potentially inadvertently, but you think about driving in your automobile, for example, and we face the potential risk of being at fault for something that causes harm and economic damage to somebody else and could lead to significant legal action against us. So those are just a few examples of the sort of risks that we face all the time and that the industry addresses day in and day out. And really, when you boil it down, there's only 4 ways you can address these risks in your life. And we listed them there on the slide. You can avoid those risks. So for example, if I want to avoid the risk of being liable for a car accident, I can choose not to own a car. And I can take that completely out of my life if I happen to live in a city that enables me to do that. I can choose to retain that risk, to just simply own it and be responsible for it and reap the benefit if things go well, but also live with the downside if it doesn't go well. Retention of that risk is certainly one of the options that's on the table. And of course, in most insurance agreements, there's a little bit of an element of retention when you see things like deductibles, where there's skin in the game, both from a carrier perspective and also for the customer. Mitigation is another way, which is just reducing the likelihood of an event taking place. So simple things like wearing a seatbelt or installing a sprinkler system in a building are definite ways to go ahead and mitigate risk. And then finally, transfer. And this, of course, is where the insurance business comes in for the most part, is transferring that risk onto somebody else in exchange for the payment of a premium. I can offload that risk and they will assume it, of course, subject to the terms and conditions of the policy. But when you break that down and think about it, insurance has been around a long time helping people manage risk. It's very much a react to a situation. Yes, there are some proactive elements in the insurance industry that have existed for some time. When you think about things like on the business side, where various engineers and inspectors or people with expertise in workplace safety will go out and survey a site and offer recommendations, or maybe even a carrier might insist on certain recommendations being implemented in order to continue to have a relationship between the client and the company. Those things are out there, but for the most part, the industry operates more from a reactive point of view. And so a trend similar, connecting this back to IoT, we are seeing insurance carriers start to embed IoT into their offerings. And that is from a multitude of angles. One of those would be in the mitigation element that I was just talking about, like similar to having engineers go out on site. In some instances, there are coverages that are being offered or not offered, or maybe higher limits being offered or not offered, depending on the presence of an IoT-based solution. We also see agents and brokers, and heard a couple of people mention that they're working on the agency side in their career or expecting to in the near future. We see them also coming up and working with partnerships on various IoT strategies, because they have a vested interest in helping their clients become better risks and makes them more marketable to the insurance industry, helps reduce premium, and it helps kind of cement the relationship between the agency and that client. Of course, technology companies are offering all kinds of solutions for the industry. If you've heard the word insurtech, you've maybe heard of fintech, which is kind of a broader term for all things technology going into the broader financial services industry. The specific niche focused on insurance is commonly referred to as insurtech. The InsurTech Connect conference is coming up here in about a month out in Las Vegas. It's a massive conference for technology and IoT solution providers just simply focused on the insurance industry. It's a significant space, and we're seeing lots of new device ideas emerge every day, and the incorporation of those into policies that are sold. So keeping this into kind of a Q&A dialogue, I want to flip to some of your thoughts as you kind of put those two things together. You've heard a little bit about IoT, hearing about the insurance industry. how do you think IoT can impact the insurance industry? And really, this could be both for good or for bad, because it's not necessarily all just on the upside. Any thoughts come to mind?
I'll offer a hint, which is that the photos on this slide may not be a hint.
Cool looking photos though, I think.
Yes.
So the first thing that comes to my mind are those devices that some personal lines companies are putting in the car. I don't know what they're called. I don't have one in my car, but there's this device that you can choose to put into your car, and it tracks how fast you're going, basically. So they'll monitor like your speed and things like that. And then according to the data they receive from that, they will adjust your, your auto insurance policy, your personal policy.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, different carriers offer that, and they all brand it in different ways. I think Progressive was one of the first to move into that space. I used to work for Nationwide. Some people mentioned Columbus, an Ohio-based company. They call it Smart Ride. And yeah, you see the options to use that. Will it at some point become mandatory? Maybe. I don't know. We're in this space of evolution, but yes, that's a very good example. Thank you. What else?
I would kind of build off that. I think that it's going to be way easier to measure risk from an insurance standpoint, especially when you have all this data available to you. I mean, the more data available to you, the easier it is to calculate premiums and things like that.
Absolutely. So measuring risk is such a key component of the insurance business. And when you think about the phrase gets thrown around, you think about what underwriters do, which is try to assess risk and take into account all kinds of various feeds of information, data, maybe reports that come back from people that have eyes on the ground at a particular, like, let's say, a job site for a contractor. Sensors now can, will we ultimately get to this North Star of real-time underwriting? Don't know, but there's certainly talk about, and I think advancements in getting to that space where you could almost have continual monitoring in some ways of the risk factors that are going on with an account, just like was talked about with the car, continual monitoring of a car while it's being driven. Imagine the possibility of having continual monitoring of a manufacturing facility. Manufacturing facilities, especially in the higher hazard space of like wood products and steel, metal, plastics, a high degree of fire hazard associated with those. And the number one factor that drives that, as many of you or all of you probably know, is just the overall maintenance and housekeeping of those facilities. Well, could sensors aid in the monitoring of that housekeeping? Because otherwise you're just sending a person out maybe once a year, maybe once every 6 months, maybe once every couple of years. And guess what? They typically know when the insurance person is showing up, right? And it's kind of like mom or dad are coming and I better get my room in order. When they know the insurance person is coming, things suddenly tidy up really, really well. Well, getting your housekeeping in order for a one-time visit is a lot easier than maintaining it. And yet it's that ongoing maintenance that is so key to preventing the loss. So great comments. Thank you. What else? Other ideas?
Do you think that we'll ever get to a point where people are willing to be monitored like that? Because I know that a big aspect of the real-time underwriting would be people would have to be okay with like that thing being in their car 24/7. And I personally know a lot of people that don't like to be tracked like that. So do you think there could ever be a time where people realize that that's good for them, or an argument for that?
Great comment, Cameron. I agree. And I think that gets into some of the downside, that I was alluding to, that it's not all upside here. There's very real concerns about privacy, and lots of varying opinions. I certainly have opinions, but a lot of other people do as well. And then certainly regulatory bodies have opinions on those as well. Hopefully informed through the democratic process, right? That they're listening to their constituents and what they want to see as well. And I think we're going to have to figure that out together over time, as a society. Will we ever get to where, 100% of people accept it? Probably not. I mean, I still see a lot of people ride motorcycles without helmets. I think that's kind of crazy. They may not. They may have decided to retain that risk. That's fine. But, it also raises questions about, are there ways that you can create benefit to the adoption of those things, right? So like with the plug-in device in the car, well, what if I get a discount for that? Is there something in it for me, either from a carrot or a stick perspective, right? Like, am I gonna reap some rewards for this adoption, or for maybe giving up a little bit of my privacy?
Yeah.
Or do I potentially face some penalties if I don't? I think all of those factors have to come together that are going to drive this. So
yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be we need to force everyone to adopt those speedometers, you know, those IoT enabled speedometers in the car, for example. And it doesn't have to be a stick. You know, I'm not going to penalize you, Cameron, for not adopting it, but if Tandika adopts it, I'm going to give her a benefit. You know, so there are ways to essentially define any product or any offering in the market that will hopefully have the right incentives for people. But
yep, obviously positive is always better. You know, having spent a lot of time at the underwriting desk, though, I can tell you where there are some situations where you may have a particular risk that you've been insuring for some time and it's losing you money. Yeah. And you're facing a decision of whether you may have to raise rates, or you may have to decide to non-renew that particular customer. But you might be able to suggest or insist on the deployment of, take something like an infrared sensor system that can detect heat, that can detect whether electrical panels are overheating. And you think of high use applications like manufacturing facilities. If you have one that's had multiple fires and you've paid out a lot in claims, you might simply decide, like, if you want us, you know, insured business XYZ to continue to be your carrier at this price point, you need to implement an infrared sensor solution that can feed real-time notifications and alerts if you're running any overheating. Otherwise, we're just not comfortable with the transfer of this risk. So always better to do it on the positive side. Sometimes you have to have those tougher interactions. And you know, we're having a lot of conversation today, a real world example of a large high-end residential condo in Honolulu that is having all kinds of problems with water losses. And they are not a direct insured of ours. They're coming to us talking about potential sensor solutions. But in the course of the conversation, you can tell they're having some strained relationship with their insurance carrier, and they're not finding a lot of other options on the market because their claims experience is so terrible. So they need help. And they're looking for sensor solutions to help get them to where they need to be.
I love that. Another thing that just came to mind is like health insurance, you know, either health insurance or life insurance. I'm thinking about smart watches that people wear, particularly for like counting steps and, you know, just measuring your exercise and things like that. So, you know, that's an opportunity there. I don't know if we'll get to a point where every single thing we're eating is being, you know, recorded, watched, measured, but you know, things like that could feed into just your health insurance rates.
Absolutely, or life insurance rates. It's very intriguing. We've all gotten comfortable with things like, you know, tobacco use being a factor in the price you pay. Well, what other factors? And again, you know, society is going to have to come together and figure out what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
Great dialogue, great stuff. We'll keep moving forward. Another piece of this that we illustrated on this slide is the ability to move from reactive to proactive. So IoT solutions present an opportunity to be more aware of what's coming down the road. And that could be like from a health perspective, that if, you know, let's just imagine somebody's monitoring their health, they're monitoring what they eat, and, you know, maybe there's some AI that's running on that in the background, or maybe just some common sense analysis is being applied, and it says, this person's running at a really high risk level based on their behaviors, based on their food intake. Or perhaps, like I was talking about the example of infrared in a manufacturing facility, if they are consistently running hot with their electrical use, sensors provide the opportunity to be proactive in addressing and mitigating that before the fire happens. So IoT solutions definitely allow for much greater insight, like we all spoke to, but they also allow for a bit of a movement from being reactive as an industry to being more proactive. And nobody wants to have claims. So the more you can mitigate that situation, the better for the industry, the better for people and businesses. And then we've already kind of touched on this with some of the answers, but a few more that maybe also might spark some ideas or some thoughts. How else can IoT mitigate losses? So the watch was mentioned under health. Things like pacemakers are becoming more automated and linked up to real-time monitoring. We've seen that as well in diabetics and the treatment of diabetes. Devices that track conditions continually, and things like the pump systems that are now present. Sensors as well for workers to prevent injury. And we're seeing more and more devices come out, but from a monitoring perspective, but also from like an assistance perspective that can help reduce strain and kind of just wear and tear on muscles and joints. Think about in the auto space, there are all kinds of alerts and sensors going on with lane correction, vehicles that won't allow you to change lanes if it detects another object in the lane next to you, or automated stopping. I happened to tour a large testing facility of a major insurance carrier a couple weeks ago, and they were testing automatic braking capabilities from sensors. And I thought, well, how do you test that? Because you have to, drive a car toward an object and hope it stops. And if it doesn't stop, well, they use balloons. They actually had huge blow up balloons that simulated cars or other objects. And they said, yeah, you'd be surprised at how often they don't work, even though this technology has come a long way in this space. And I think we'll continue to get better. In the property space, we talked about water leaks. You also see things in the space of frozen pipe, refrigeration failure, which is such a big deal for food spoilage and preservation, mold conditions, power failure, electrical overload. So lots of spaces, and these are just kind of the basics of where the industry can go, where IoT systems can help with mitigation. And then we promised you in the learning objectives a few real life examples. And so I just hit on refrigeration. I'm going to jump into this one, and then Nevenka is going to talk about some things that she sees more in the industrial space. So real world example, well, we kind of still are, I guess, in the pandemic during COVID-19, when it was really going hot and heavy and schools were closing down. Many of them, as you know, were continuing to offer meals, so people could still stop by their school. A lot of kids are dependent on the meal services provided by their school system. Those meal preparation facilities continued to operate. And in a building that was unstaffed because it was a weekend, we saw a situation where a walk-in freezer was malfunctioning, causing the temperature to rise. And it put at risk a significant volume of food that not only presented a financial risk for the school system, but also a public health risk for the people that were dependent on that food. And knowing the situation with supply chains that we continue to experience today, who knows how long it would have taken to replace that food. So in this particular example, we saw that an alert was sent out from a sensor that the temperature was going up. That alert went to a building supervisor who was able to take action on it. They were able to respond to that situation, stop the temperature from rising by replacing a failed thermostat device, and ultimately prevent the spoilage on over 8,000 meals. So that's the type of situation where you think about IoT and monitoring and how people may feel about it. I would hope when it at least comes to things like that, it's hard to see any downside to that kind of monitoring, right? It's a win-win-win all the way around. So just another real life example there that we're actually seeing. And then Nevenka.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that I want to highlight in this example. First of all, the context, which is this example really is around the industrial side. So big factories, big manufacturing companies. They have equipment that is very, very large, very, very expensive. Like one piece will cost millions of dollars. And if the conditions are right, that equipment could fail critically. There could be a fire, there could be a power outage such that production completely stops, whatever it may be. The thing that's really different here is that up to now, we've been talking about sensors helping us to prevent an event from happening. But on the insurance side, what we do is we still insure the event. So we tell you that the equipment may break. We alert you so you can go do something about it, like take out the food from the fridge. And if it does happen, then we cover the equipment that broke, right? But what's really interesting about IoT is that it's giving us an opportunity to actually insure something else. So not only insure against the breakdown of the equipment, but actually insure against malfunctioning of the sensor. And that's actually a space that we're getting into it. We're telling our customers, we're going to provide you with sensors. If the sensor tells you that you're in green status, meaning everything is operating fine, we don't expect any kind of breakdown, and shit happens, so to speak, meaning the equipment breaks, then we actually cover that for our clients. What we know, for in the case of the industrial, the equipment breaking down has an impact of they're not able to produce whatever products it is that they're producing. It could be spoilage, like Mark mentioned, but at a bigger scale. It could be lost revenue, right? So that's an example of a very specific way in which IoT isn't just taking us from reaction to prevention, but it's actually impacting the type of products that we develop and that we offer in the market. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm not going to go a lot into the details of this, but just to really synthesize it, we work a lot with partners. So we work a lot with technology companies that actually build these sensors, and we essentially we dig deep into them to really understand the technology and the engineering behind it, and based on that understanding, work to actually develop a risk solution and an insurance policy to actually guarantee the performance of the sensor itself, such that if the sensor fails, that's where our insurance kicks in. But it's just really interesting that we're thinking about it not only in terms of preventing and telling someone when something is about to happen, but actually, if we don't tell you that a failure is imminent and you experience it, then you should be compensated for that. Mark, I know that we have a couple of other examples. I think I'm not sure if these will be distributed, so maybe we should just skip these two and go to the last question and leave a little bit of time for some open questions.
Yeah, been a lot of good conversation. So we threw a few extra examples in here in case we needed to go into further detail, but I think we're running a little bit toward the end of time. So we're going to go ahead and skip through these and take us here. So nice to have to essential has been the theme of the conversation. What do you believe will ultimately be the drivers of a transition from nice to have to essential? Thoughts on that?
In terms of technology, like technology that's nice to have, but will be essential in future?
Yeah, I mean, as we talk with peers in the industry, or we talk with primary insurers that are insuring homes and cars and businesses, we're kind of in a space today with IoT where you get a range of reaction from, oh, that sounds nice. Yeah, I know I'm going to need to get to that at some point, to, oh my gosh, I better get on this now. And our sense is it's moving in this direction of nice to have to essential. I mean, that's kind of our thesis statement, I guess, if you will, of the presentation. But it's interesting when you think about what's ultimately going to drive that. And so we thought we'd kind of leave that as our last question for discussion. Thoughts?
I like it. Cameron, did you have any thoughts? I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, I mean, I think from an insurance standpoint, what's going to transition it, I think, will just be the competition. For example, if a carrier is able to provide these almost exact quotes for premiums and stuff based on your risk, it's going to be really hard to compete with if you don't have the exact same information and data collection capabilities.
And you said that's what you're going into, right? Is on the data analytics side. So absolutely, you nailed it. there's been so much advancement in data analytics in the industry today, but it's predicated on the quality of the information coming in. So the data that's supplied to really smart guys like you, it's kind of a garbage in, garbage out, right? If you're not getting access to good data, it's hard to produce good analytics and modeling to tell a carrier what to do. Well, if sensors increase the quantity and the quality of the information that's fed, you're going to be able to get really, really good with your data analytics and outcompete your competitors based on, you know, what you do from a pricing perspective. So great answer. Other thoughts?
So what comes to mind for me are those meters. I think they're called parameters, especially like in South Florida, for example. So with property insurance, some property policies are triggered by the speed, right, of the hurricane. Like it has to hit certain kilometers per hour in order for your property policy to be activated. And so they have these, I think they're called parameters or triggers, you know, that they put in certain places that actually measure the speed of the windstorm or the hurricane or whatever is passing through, so that you can get that accurate, you know, description. And once it hits that number, your property policy is triggered. So that's just something that comes to mind that sort of shows that integration between insurance and technology.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's an I think it's still kind of nascent. Maybe it's been out there for longer than I realized, but the whole space of what they call parametric insurance, it sounds like a medical term, but it's not. It's really just more about coverage being triggered just because an event happened, not necessarily because damage took place, right? So if you can prove that a certain event happened, maybe that's a more efficient way to distribute insurance. Maybe it takes some of the, you know, the claims judgment, the back and forth that can go into some of the investigations where you just, you know what, we have maybe you as a business owner, you have a risk related to a hurricane. I know my business is going to be impacted if there's a hurricane, even if my building faces no damage. You know, whatever it might be. Say you're in the restaurant business and everybody's going to evacuate and nobody's going to be around to eat at your restaurant. I don't know. I'm just coming up with something on the spot. You might want like a parametric insurance that pays you financially should that event happen. Well, it has to be measured somehow, to your point. So good thoughts.
So we only have 3 minutes left. Should we open it up for questions?
Yeah, that would be great. And I did put your LinkedIn information in the chat. I hope that's okay for the students to reach out to you and connect by LinkedIn. And I think on the
Absolutely.
next page, you've got your contact information as well. But yeah, in the last 3 or so minutes that we have, does anybody have any questions? Even if they're general questions, would be happy to answer them.
I can go. How much do you think cybersecurity insurance is going to change as the IoT grows? I know if you have more data, it probably costs more to protect.
Yeah, so that's another potential downside, right? Like we've seen the emergence of significant new risk from all of these great devices and all this great data analytics. The space of cyber, I can't think of a single insurance conversation that I've been in the last like 2 years that didn't involve cyber, concern about cyber, where is cyber going? And you know, nobody has a crystal ball on it, but there's a lot of emerging players in this space. I think cyber is only going to grow as a share of what consumers and businesses have to think about in terms of managing their risk. So right now that market is really getting tight. Premiums are going up. But there's a lot of interesting new entrants in the marketplace that are bringing in monitoring based solutions, whether you call them sensors or not, I don't know, but just, you know, plugging into the data and everything related from an IT perspective that a small or medium or a large business may have in order to assess their risk and to assess it continually and to provide alerts and to say, you know, we think you're potentially being attacked right now and you need to do this or you need to do that. It's a very fluid space. Wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't know. Nevenka, any thoughts on cyber?
No, I mean, just I second what you said.
It's a very dynamic environment.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting if you think back. I'll just add another point. I could go on and on, Navenka, you're probably gonna have to cut me off at the hour, but cyber initially was all about liability, right? Like the main concern was, I'm a business, I have your data because you're a customer. Somebody hacks me, accesses your data, and I didn't have good controls in place, so I'm liable, right? You want to sue me because now where that's shifting, obviously, when you think of ransomware and you think about things like shutting down hackers shutting down significant operations, it's a totally different exposure. It's not so much about the liability. And I honestly kind of think we're almost at a point now where everybody just assumes their data is, or at least I do. I assume my data is out there somewhere. Like I wish I could protect it, but I probably can't. But if I'm running a business, I'm much more concerned about loss of revenue, loss of income, potentially having my operation shut down, and a ransom in crypto being demanded of me because of my cyber exposure. So the world of cyber liability is still a big deal. I don't want to diminish it. It's still a very big deal, but the exposures have really shifted toward more like operational and loss of income.
Well, thank you all so much. We're right at 2 o'clock. So just want to say thank you again to our awesome speakers that were here with us today, Navenka and Mark. We appreciate your time. Thank you for hanging out with us for an hour. So for the students that were here, hopefully you took screenshots and wrote everybody's names down and click on the links that are in the chat so that you can keep in touch with all of us. Our next session will be next week, Thursday, which is August the 4th at 1 o'clock Eastern time. Our presenting company will be CRC, and the topic is Wholesale Brokers of Tomorrow, How Data and Analytics, so that's for you, Cameron, are shaping property placements today and in the future. So thank you again to our awesome speakers and for everyone else who joined the call today, and we hope to see you next week. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Good luck, everybody.